hearing what I'm hearing, right? So I'm hearing that the strength of Manchester was in our relationships, right? And the strength was in our neighborhood, in our neighbors, right? That's what I'm hearing. So one of the things I just wanted to speak about was Dr. Burks, right? So my mother, who's a registered nurse, could not go to nursing school here in Pittsburgh. She couldn't go to Duquesne, so she had to go to Philadelphia to Mercy Douglas to nursing school. And when she came back, she couldn't get a job in a hospital, but you know where she got a job at? At Dr. Burks' office, right? And I'll tell you something you probably do know. Dr. Burks' office used to stay open until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Because I remember my granddad going to pick my mom up from there at 2, 3 in the morning. Or I remember us going up there at midnight, his office was still open. First on Federal Street and then on Boyle, right? So we had those connections. And he is also my brother's godfather as well. Let us now take a look at our humble beginnings. And I want to bring to the podium Dr. Tyi-Sanna Jones. Dr. Tyi-Sanna Jones is an educator with a passion for work that focuses on the equity and quality education for all children. She is the board president of MindWorks Collaborative, a nonprofit that supports special education leaders of color through community building and using the lens of equity to build capacity in their school systems to move the needle for cultural and linguistically diverse students. Dr. Jones works to impact the trajectory in the field of education for students and leaders that have been historically underserved. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Tyi-Sanna Jones.
Good evening. So, growing up in a community that functioned very much like an extended family, there were experiences here that I definitely took for granted. And I thought that every Black person grew up in a community like Manchester, and they didn't. So some of my fondest memories of Manchester are pre-1990. However, in the midst of the worst days of the 90s, those connections and values literally saved my life more than once. The uniqueness of the relationships within this community went back for generations. Families settling here from Virginia, North Carolina, and Alabama in search of new opportunities in the big city. By the time I came along, 1976, families were here for 2 generations and sometimes 3. And so my early memories for Manchester include moving to North Avenue from Page Street, like literally walking around the corner with like my big baby doll, like walking on the corner, and walking up the alleyway here to preschool at Training Wheels over here, and then running up and down the ramp at Bidwell Church, walking to the library, passing the aviary on the way there, and passing Gus and Yaya's on the way back. And a conversation my mom and I have, it's like the first time I was really mad at my mom, is I came home from kindergarten upset. These old ladies kept calling me out of my name. And I'm like, they calling me a name, Mommy, they're calling me a name. So she goes up there to, handle business to find out that they're calling me Little Tilly. And the lunch ladies were Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Mobley, Mrs. Hendricks, and my mother was like, oh, I'm outranked. I can't do nothing here. Figure it out, little girl, figure it out, right? So I'm like, dang, my mom is a punk. But she's not, right? My mom is amazing, and we'll talk about that later, right? So another friend of my grandmother's was Mrs. Porter. She was the classroom aide in my kindergarten class, and we had a side deal. So apparently I can read and write, and a lot of the other kids couldn't. And the teacher made us write all this stuff. I knew how to write. I wasn't doing that. I was the kid that said, why? And since she couldn't give me a good one, I wasn't doing it. So Mrs. Porter did not want me to get jacked up by my father, who was in the middle of his dissertation and had a very flexible schedule and would pop up randomly, and I got lots of spankings at Manchester Elementary School. So she was trying to save me from myself. So we had a side deal to keep me from my daddy. So fast forward a few decades, as I was finishing my doctorate, she's like, we were both kind of shocked that I became an educator, because I was kind of not the best student here. So One of the things about this is we've heard memories, and I was here to represent the young people, and I giggle because I'm like, young, me? However, but there's a lot of information I've learned. I asked Stanley from the gate, why 64? Why are you starting with 64? And I don't know if how many of you have ever really had long conversations with Stanley, but I didn't get a straight answer. He has so much information, and like you've heard from the people before me, everybody here is literally a wealth of information, and all of you are like libraries. So every time Stanley talked to me, I'm getting more and more information. I'm like, Stanley, I can't, you told me 5 minutes, but I can't do all this in 5 minutes. And there's so much information. So what I just gathered, why 64 to kind of set the context of what was going on in the country and in Manchester at that time. So we know this in 1964, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill, right? We also know that before that, the March on Washington was in 63. Voting was legal, but not easy for people in the South. And so we know that registering to vote was asking for trouble in many places. Freedom riders who were trained to protect and register people in the South were being attacked and killed. There were lynchings, cross burnings, and people were being attacked and killed. The Ku Klux Klan was visible, very visible. And government officials like the Alabama segregationist George Wallace gained popularity with slogans like segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. This was just in most of you all's generation. My generation didn't know. Again, I learned so much talking with Stanley over the last week because I got pulled into this last Thursday to be exact. And there's just so much information that is here, and I really implore you all to take advantage of these conversations and recording these memories, and we hope to get some of that going later on as well. So at this time in 1964, there were race riots happening in the North and the South, and school districts refusing to still integrate, the creation of de facto segregation. So you're in the school, you're together, but you're not really together. You know, that's the work that I kind of got into. And so Black folks at this time just really felt empowered and galvanized, needing to be seen in this country as equals. International attention sparked as it was witnessed that European prisoners of war were treated better than Black soldiers overseas. The words of our Pledge of Allegiance was very much an unmet promise. White allies rallied side by side with protesters throughout the country, white congregations supporting and advocating and joining side by side with their Black brothers and sisters for the voting rights, housing equality, policies supporting discrimination and segregation to be revoked. Let's do the right thing here. So organizations like neighborhood centers began to look at youth as leaders and the ones who would do the marching and the demonstration. Bidwell Church and neighborhood centers organized youth to go to Chicago to train with radical organizer Saul Alinsky for civil disobedience training. I heard that story for the first time after finding the book R is for Radical at a random flea market. The book was orange. I like the color orange, is why I picked it up, okay? And so I'm reading it, and I'm like, I have to have this book. It randomly in my backseat of my car one day. My mom was like, what you know about him? I'm like, I don't. She said, oh, I was in his house. What? Who are you? And that was like 10 years ago. So that was like the beginning of me really like, I don't know this lady that has raised me all these years at all. So in the midst of programming and marches, Pittsburgh's racial tensions were rising in Manchester, though always a racially mixed neighborhood was really no different. Quick question, another story. Anybody under 50, do you know why there is a new house in the 1400 block of Pennsylvania Avenue and 2 new houses on Liverpool? Me either, till like yesterday. Let me tell you what happened. So, 1968, there were kids playing in a backyard with a basketball. The ball went into Mrs. Wright's backyard, she's a white woman, Pennsylvania Avenue, so in between. Keithy Williams went to retrieve it and was shot dead, claiming that she was scared for her life. 3 days later, her house burnt to the ground. Thank y'all. And as did the businesses in the 1200 and 1300 block of Pennsylvania Avenue, which was the primary business district. All new information for me as of yesterday, day before yesterday, baby. So 1968, which I knew was the year MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. So riots in Manchester, the Hill District, and Homewood would leave these communities, our communities, decimated. Rebuilding these communities were clearly obviously a priority. With most of the white families gone for the suburbs, the new developments in the city that now blacks could buy, which would be Bellevue, Bellevue, Broadhead Manor, and Stanton Heights. So those are new places being built up. So folks here are like, we have a choice. Do we have to stay here, or can we go somewhere else? We have a choice here. And so we have new things and new challenges we're looking for. So the burned down houses and businesses that were needing new repair, the city wanting to build highways to get people to the suburbs. What are we gonna do? So Manchester started really working on negotiations. The other task that I'm here for is to kind of talk through the trajectory of Manchester's role in community development. Unlike Homewood and the Hill District, if you noticed, though we had the same riots at the same time, what our community looks like afterwards is very different. And it's very intentional. But again, these were stories that weren't necessarily passed down. I grew up in the house, but again, I didn't know the story of the hows and the why. I just saw things happening and didn't know why it happened. So let me tell you what happened. So Manchester is facing negotiations with the city around eminent domain, when they could just come and take your house, essentially, give you a little bit of money, and say, get on, we're about to take your house and build this highway. So there were negotiations, because like, what, you're not just gonna give me any of your money, how much is this house worth? And those are the conversations that many of our leaders were having with people who were being essentially forced out of their homes. So they were making sure the houses, or people who were getting their homes taken from them, essentially, were getting as much money as the house was actually worth, versus saying, oh, we're gonna give you what we can give you because you don't know no better. So we were educating very much around making sure that those people being moved would get the right amount of money that their house was actually worth, so they can do something more and better. The other piece of it is that what was happening more and more is that there had to be a holistic change and a holistic plan in order to make it really work. And so these informal groups with the churches started galvanizing, working together, organizing these things where they would like take buses, and groups of people would just like show up and like embarrass the heck out of these slumlords, calling them out for being slumlords of this community, and making sure that people knew they were not running good businesses. Their neighbors weren't good business owners, and it was affecting our community and what our community even looked like. Also recognizing that, how do we take over city council meetings? How do we make people know we're not just gonna sit here and take what you're gonna give us? We're gonna be very intentional about making sure we get what we need to be a full and complete community. So we also realized that there had to be creation of jobs, workforce development, housing support, literacy classes, addressing addiction. These were all things that were absolutely needed, and it brought the formalization of the Black Action Society, Community Development Corporation, Bidwell Cultural and Training Center. And having witnessed, Manchester folks, having witnessed urban renewal activities, because all this money's out for urban renewal, code word, we're tearing your house down, and we're gonna give you $5, thanks. So we're like, no, you're not gonna tear our houses down. So there came a program saying, for every house you tear down, you're gonna build a new one. And so again, very intentional about making sure we're getting what we need for this community to remain a community. If you look now, Manchester looks very different than the Hill and Homewood, because it was intentional. Our community worked together to make it happen. It was not on accident. I'm also here to kind of share out a shout out to my mother, because my mother, again, something I found out within the last week, was responsible for building the first affordable houses here in Manchester on North Franklin. And these houses were sold for $12,000. And at that time, my mom was a recent college graduate. She got the job because she was kind of working with John Cundiff and working with the neighborhood centers. And she recognized the need, and she worked on that thing. And as she worked on those, the next set of houses we're looking at were Sheffield Street. Those Sheffield Street houses were extremely important and exciting because the laborers were actual students from the training center that was here in the community. So we're creating the ecosystem to support our own. So soon after this, federal money was frozen, efforts to explore historical designation and preservation to keep the momentum of building in Manchester. The historical preservation and recognition has saved our community. Without it, we would look like Homewood in the Hill. Without it, we would not be the most expensive neighborhood, Black neighborhood in Pittsburgh. That's the reality, okay? And so with this, with every opportunity, there were all these opportunities to advocate and educate. So they really focused around this, how do we build this historic designation, and how do we kind of keep the look, how do we make this an important thing, how do we get people to understand what this means for us, short-term and long-term. And that historical designation opened up another pot of money, so now we can continue building, and we can continue renovating. One of the other projects that was done, it was a house done on North Avenue, West North Avenue, to show people that you can update a house and renovate the house. And you can have all the bells and whistles in an old house without having a brand new house. The house I grew up in, I saw pictures when it was bought. My Lord, okay? It was like something holding it up the front. I guess they were proving a point, right? And the point was proven because the house sold for much more than it did. And the work, I grew up in the house was constantly being renovated. So the house I left was absolutely beautiful. And it showed that if you put the work in and you understand the money, you understand what this means to have historical preservation or historical designation, what this can do for the longevity of our community, what it can do for the equity in our homes. And this is the education, and advocacy piece that my mother has been actively involved in, literally since she was in high school, being sent to Chicago to learn how to advocate. So with that, I'm gonna stop because we've been here all night and I can go on and on. All of us are talking about wonderful things about this community. And so with this, the lesson I wanna leave you all with is what makes this community just so different and so very special is, yes, the relationships. What I've admired most about the giants that you all have spoke about and the giants that we've been continually building on is that this overview for advocacy and education, those were the things. Advocacy, education for the purpose of respect and dignity. Those are the things that made our community just so absolutely special. And we're not done yet, y'all. It's not over. There's work to be done, and your stories must be told in order for us to continue that work. So thank you so much. And right now, can I have my mom come up here? We have a presentation. Michelle Jones, where you at? Where did Mickey go? Could you come up, please, ma'am? Stanley has something for you. I was kind of a plant. I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, what I told you I was doing. It happens.
She was the first community organizer in Manchester. And so today, we're going full circle to say thank you, Michelle. Thank you for all the work you did. We appreciate you. Okay.
Okay, excuse me. All right, moving right along, we have